A stray dog's desperate barks echoed through the rain, drawing curious onlookers and police to an abandoned car, which they discovered next left, everyone speechless. The rain hammered relentlessly against the quiet streets of suburban Abu Dhabi, turning asphalt into mirrors of the storm above. Each drop seemed to fall heavier than the last, muffling all sound, save for the haunting echo of a dog's bark. It wasn't the aimless yelping of a stray. This bark carried a rhythm, a desperate urgency that cut through the storm. By the time the clock struck midnight, the barking had drawn the attention of curious and uneasy neighbors. Peering from behind curtains, their faces pale in the glow of flickering streetlights, they saw the source, a large, soaked dog circling a battered sedan abandoned on the corner. Its fur clung tightly to its lean frame, and its barks came in steady, defiant bursts, each one daring anyone to step closer. Old Mr. Farid, his lean figure cloaked in a thick coat, stood at his gate, his flashlight's beam bouncing off the rain. He squinted through the downpour, muttering, "What's gotten into that dog tonight?" Behind him, whispers stirred among the gathered neighbors, their voices tinged with fear and curiosity. "Maybe it's rabid," suggested a younger man, clutching a sturdy stick. The suggestion sent a ripple of unease through the group. Mariam, a widow who had lived on the street longer than most, stepped forward, her shawl pulled tightly around her frail shoulders. "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. "That's not a mad dog. Look at it. It's guarding that car." As if sensing her words, the dog growled low, its soaked tail standing stiff as it blocked any approach toward the sedan. Its eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces of the growing crowd, silently communicating a message that none could fully grasp. "You think it's a police dog?" Farid asked, his tone skeptical but curious. In Abu Dhabi, dogs weren't common pets. They were workers, trained for tasks far beyond a stray's ken. A murmur spread through the group. Speculations about the dog's purpose mingled with concern. What if it had been abandoned? Or worse, what if it was guarding something sinister? The metallic scent in the air mingled with the rain, sharp and faintly bitter. The younger man with the stick shifted uncomfortably, his grip tightening. "We can't just stand here. What if there's something dangerous in that car?" he said, stepping forward with hesitation. "No!" Mariam's voice rang out sharper than expected, cutting through the whispers. She stepped in front of the crowd, her eyes meeting the dog's with a surprising steadiness. "This dog is trying to tell us something. It's not here to hurt anyone." The dog's growl softened at her words, its piercing gaze flickering towards her briefly before returning to its vigil. It stayed rooted, trembling from the cold and the effort of its constant guard. Mariam's heart ached at the sight. There was something about the animal, an invisible bond she couldn't explain. She thought of her late husband's words, spoken long ago. Sometimes, even a dog's instincts are wiser than ours. Before the tension could escalate, Mariam pulled out her phone, dialing with deliberate precision. "We need the police," she said over her shoulder. "Let them handle this." Her calm decisiveness quieted the group, though murmurs persisted. Some shifted nervously under umbrellas, others grumbled about wasting time, but Mariam stood firm, her resolve unwavering. By the time the distant wail of sirens pierced the rain, the street had grown eerily still. The dog hadn't moved, its body a soaked silhouette against the sedan, its deep breaths visible in the cold night air. The crowd parted as the patrol car approached, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Red and blue lights painted the drenched street in shifting hues, reflecting off the faces of the gathered neighbors. Officer Umar al-Haddad stepped out first, a tall, broad-shouldered man with years of experience in handling animals. His partner, a younger woman named Noura, followed close behind. Both approached cautiously, Umar holding a calm but steady hand in front of him. "What's the story here?" Umar asked, glancing at Mariam. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the rain running down her face. "This dog, I think it's guarding the car. It hasn't let anyone near, and it's been barking all night." The dog's posture shifted slightly, not relaxed, but less hostile. It let out a sharp bark, its eyes darting to the car as if urging Umar to hurry. The officer exchanged a glance with Noura, who nodded and moved toward the sedan's rear door. The dog whined softly, its eyes never leaving the officer's. Mariam held her breath along with the "stay back," Umar cautioned, raising a hand to the crowd before turning to his partner. He approached cautiously. His posture was relaxed, his hands open, yet his movements were deliberate, showing respect for the dog's evident distress. He'd seen loyalty like this before, but something about the dog's unwavering presence struck a chord. "Easy, boy," Umar murmured, his voice low and soothing as he stepped closer. The dog didn't lunge or growl, but maintained his stance, every muscle taut with determination. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, locked onto Umar, a silent but powerful message. "This is mine to protect." The crowd whispered among themselves, speculating and second-guessing, but Umar paid them no mind. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to the dog's level, letting the dog see his intentions. Slowly, he extended his hand, palm up, his words steady and calm. "No one's here to hurt you," Umar said softly. "We just want to help." The dog's bark softened into a low growl, his wet fur clinging to his lean frame. His ears twitched as if weighing Umar's sincerity. Minutes passed like hours, the rain masking the quiet tension between the two. Finally, with a hesitant step, the dog inched backward, his eyes never leaving Umar, as if granting a reluctant permission. "That's it, boy," Umar said, his relief hidden behind a calm exterior. He gestured for his partner to join him, but the dog's head snapped toward the movement, a sharp bark halting anyone from getting too close. "Stay put," Umar ordered the others. "Let him guide us." The officer moved closer to the car, the dog trailing beside him like a silent sentinel. The air around them was thick with an unspoken understanding. As Umar reached for the door handle, the dog's gaze flickered between him and the car, his body trembling from exhaustion, yet brimming with resolve. When the door creaked open, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. There, in the back seat, lay a newborn, swaddled in a tattered blanket, unmoving and pale. Umar's breath caught as he carefully lifted the fragile bundle into his arms. "Call an ambulance," he barked to his partner, urgency lacing his words. The dog whined softly, his nose brushing against the blanket as Umar cradled the baby close. The dog's trembling legs nearly gave out, but he steadied himself, his eyes glued to the infant, as if reassuring himself it was safe. The journey to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and hurried voices. The dog rode alongside Umar in the patrol car, his body pressed tightly against the door, his head angled toward the baby, never once breaking his watchful stance. At the hospital, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingled with the frenetic energy of nurses and doctors rushing to stabilize the baby. The dog trailed behind, his steps faltering but determined, refusing to be separated from the child he had so fiercely guarded. "He's with me," Umar explained to the staff, his voice brooking no argument. They let the dog stay, their curiosity piqued by the bond between the two. Once inside the pediatric ward, the dog collapsed onto the cold floor beside the baby's crib, his exhaustion finally overcoming him. His breaths came slow and heavy, his eyes half-lidded but still fixed on the tiny form now hooked to machines and wrapped in warm blankets. The nurses exchanged glances, murmuring in awe, Anne knelt beside the dog, her hand hesitating before gently stroking his damp fur. "He's incredible," she whispered, her voice tinged with wonder. As the hours stretched into dawn, the dog barely stirred, his loyalty undeterred by fatigue or the unfamiliar surroundings. Umar sat nearby, watching the scene unfold with a mix of admiration and quiet resolve. He had seen devotion before, but never like this. Never this raw, this absolute. When the baby's heartbeat steadied and the machines signaled improvement, a collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The dog lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Umar's in a silent exchange. "You did good, boy," Umar said, his voice low but filled with respect. "You did real good." The dog lowered his head again, pressing it gently against the side of the crib, his body finally relaxing. In that moment, as the hospital buzzed back to life, it became clear to everyone present that this dog was more than a guardian. The dog was a hero, steadfast and true, carrying a purpose that transcended words. And for Umar, watching the rain streak down the hospital windows, it felt as though he'd witnessed something sacred, an act of loyalty so profound it could only be described as extraordinary. The next morning, Umar awoke to the persistent, urgent barking of the dog echoing down the hospital corridor. The sound carried a peculiar weight, a blend of insistence and distress that demanded attention. The animal stood rigid before the door to the intensive care room, its soaked fur now dry but still matted from the previous night's storm. Umar recognized the dog immediately. It was the same one that had guarded the child found in the abandoned car. Now, its behavior was different, almost purposeful, as if it knew something the rest of them didn't. With a sigh, Umar adjusted his white coat and approached the animal cautiously. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, his voice low and steady. The dog didn't flinch, its eyes locked on the door, its tail flicking impatiently. It barked again, softer this time, but with no less urgency. Curiosity prickled at the edges of Umar's mind as he stepped closer. The dog, sensing his approach, quieted and wagged its tail briefly, then turned its attention back to the door, letting out a low whimper. Umar's brows furrowed. "All right," he said, as much to himself as to the dog. "Let's see what you're so worked up about." He pushed the door open, revealing the dimly lit room. Machines beeped softly in the background, their rhythmic sounds almost soothing. In the bed lay a young woman, her face pale and drawn, dark circles etched beneath her closed eyes. The nameplate beside her read Rainier, and her frailty was immediately apparent. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her body encumbered by tubes and monitors. The dog padded in without hesitation, its demeanor shifting from urgency to tenderness. It approached the bed and gently placed its front paws on the edge, lifting itself to nuzzle Rania's hand. Then it licked her fingers with the kind of care Umar had only seen in the most loyal of companions. He stood frozen for a moment, watching the interaction with a strange mix of awe and disbelief. "How do you know her?" he murmured, almost to himself. The dog didn't respond, of course, but the way it pressed closer to Rania seemed to speak volumes. There was a bond here, something deep and undeniable. Driven by a nagging need to understand, Umar crossed to the desk at the corner of the room and pulled out Rania's medical file. His eyes scanned the pages quickly, his mind racing as he pieced together her story. Breast cancer, diagnosed too late for effective treatment. Severe malnutrition, likely from neglecting her own health in favor of someone else's care. Recently gave birth. The pieces began to click into place. He flipped to the notes section and read about her current condition. Comatose, but stable. She had been admitted 2 days ago, brought in by a passerby who found her collapsed on a sidewalk. No family had come forward, no emergency contacts had been listed. And yet, here was this dog, devoted to her with a loyalty that defied explanation. The night before came rushing back to Umar, the child in the car, the storm, the dog's vigilant protection. Could it be? He turned to the dog, who now sat quietly beside the bed, its head resting on the thin mattress near Rania's hand. Was that her child? Umar whispered, the question lingering in the air like a wisp of smoke. The dog's ears twitched, but it gave no answer beyond the steady gaze it kept on its mistress. A soft gasp pulled Umar's attention back to the bed. Rania's fingers twitched against the sheets, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but it quickly sharpened as she spotted the dog. "Leo," she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out weakly, her hand trembling as it rested on the dog's head. Leo let out a soft whine, wagging his tail and leaning into her touch. The relief in her expression was almost palpable, and for a moment the sterile hospital room seemed warmer. Where's my baby?" Rania's voice cracked, and her eyes darted around the room in panic. Umar stepped closer, his hands raised to calm her. "Your baby is safe," he said gently. "We found him last night in a car during the storm. He's being cared for in the nursery now." Rania's face crumpled with relief, tears spilling down her cheeks as she clung to Leo. "Thank God," she whispered, stroking the dog's fur. "Thank you." Umar watched the scene unfold, his mind buzzing with questions. The connection between Rania, Leo, and the baby was undeniable, but the full story remained a mystery. One thing, however, was clear. Leo wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a lifeline in the chaos that had nearly claimed this small family. As he stepped back into the hallway, giving Rania a moment of privacy, Umar resolved to uncover the truth. Whatever had brought Leo to that car and tied him so irrevocably to Rania and her child was a story worth knowing. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the ceiling fan above. Its steady rhythm a contrast to the storm of emotion in Rania's voice. She sat at the edge of the hospital bed, her hands clenched tightly around the worn blanket draped over her lap. Across from her, Umar leaned forward in his chair, his brow furrowed, listening intently. The years of worry and heartache etched deep into Rania's face told more than words ever could. But she spoke anyway, her voice trembling as she began. "I was born in a small village," she said, her words slow and measured, as though every one of them carried its own weight. "A place where the sand met the mountains, and the air always smelled of salt and dust. We were poor, everyone there was, but we managed. At least that's what I thought back then." Umar nodded, encouraging her to continue. His gaze didn't waver, his quiet presence urging her to unburden herself. Rania took a shaky breath. "He came to our village when I was 19, a trader from Turkey. His name was Selim. At first he seemed so different from everyone I knew, so polished, so sure of himself. He talked about places I could only dream of, about a life so far removed from the one I lived. I was young, Umar, and foolish." Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket, her knuckles white as she continued. "He promised me the world, said he would take me away, show me a life where I wouldn't have to worry about empty pots or cracked roofs. I believed him. Every word. I gave him everything I had, everything I was." Rania's voice broke, but she steadied herself quickly. "Then, one day, I told him I was pregnant. I thought he'd be happy, that we'd build a life together." Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "Instead, he told me he had a wife, a family. He said our time together was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a mistake. Umar winced at her words, his jaw tightening, but he stayed silent. This wasn't a moment for him to speak. My parents. Rania shook her head, her gaze dropping to her lap. They couldn't bear the shame. They said I had brought dishonor to our family, and they made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. Just like that, I was out, alone. Umar's eyes flickered with something unreadable, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Still, he said nothing, allowing her story to unfold. There was this dog, Rania said after a pause, her tone softening. A stray that used to linger around our village. I'd feed him scraps whenever I could spare them. I called him Leo. He was just there, always there, watching from a distance. Her lips curved into a faint, wistful smile, a rare glimmer of warmth breaking through the sorrow. The day I left, he followed me. I didn't call him, didn't even think he would come, but he did, and he never left. The room fell into silence, save for the muffled sounds of the hospital outside the door. Rania's voice wavered as she spoke again. Leo became everything. My companion. My protector. When the baby was born, he guarded us both. Those first months were a blur of cold nights and empty stomachs. I didn't know how we'd survive, but somehow we did. And Leo, he always found a way to keep us safe. Umar's voice finally broke through, low and steady. And the storm? What happened that night? Rania swallowed hard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The rain came so fast. I was desperate to find shelter, to keep the baby warm. I found an old car parked along the road, unlocked. It wasn't much, but it was something. I told Leo to stay with the baby, to protect him, and I went to look for help. Her voice cracked and she paused, her shoulders trembling under the weight of her memory. I didn't make it far. My body, it couldn't take any more. I collapsed before I could find anyone. When I woke up, I was here. Umar leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. His heart ached for her, for the unimaginable trials she had faced. And Leo? He said softly. He stayed. He kept the baby safe. Rania nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. He's never left my side. Not once. Even when the world turned its back on me, Leo stayed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Umar's gaze drifted to the small window, where rain still trickled down the glass, though the storm had long passed. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. You've been through more than anyone should have to endure, but you're here. You've fought, and that's no small thing. Rania gave him a faint, tired smile, her hand resting on the edge of the bed. I don't know what comes next, she murmured, but as long as I have Leo and my son, maybe that's enough. Umar reached out, covering her hand with his. It's more than enough, he said. And in that moment, they both knew the fight wasn't over, but neither was their hope. The late afternoon sun cast a pale golden light across the small hospital room, its warmth struggling to reach the fragile figure lying in the bed. Rania's breaths came shallow and uneven, a faint wheeze accompanying each exhale. The cancer had ravaged her body, leaving her weaker with each passing day. Yet, in those brief moments of consciousness, her thoughts were never on herself. Her gaze fell on the framed photograph at the bedside, a picture of her son, laughing with Leo, the ever-faithful dog who now lay curled at her feet. Leo's dark eyes followed her every movement, his head lifting occasionally, as if to assure her he was still there. She reached a trembling hand toward him, her fingers barely brushing his fur. The simple touch brought her a small measure of comfort. "Leo," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak, barely audible over the hum of the oxygen machine. The dog stirred, lifting his head and thumping his tail gently against the floor. "Good boy," she managed, her lips curving into the faintest smile. Umar entered quietly, a tray of tea balanced carefully in his hands. He was a steady presence in her life, a close friend who had stepped in when things fell apart. His face, lined with worry and sleepless nights, softened as he set the tray on the bedside table. "You're awake," he said softly, pulling a chair closer to her bed. His voice carried a calm reassurance that had anchored her through the worst of it. "How are you feeling?" Rania managed a small shake of her head, her eyes glistening. "Not much time left," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the window where the sunlight now bathed the room in hues of amber. "But, Umar, I need to talk to you." He leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "I'm here," he said gently. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were steady. "When I'm gone, promise me you'll look after my son and Leo. They'll need someone who loves them." Umar swallowed hard, his throat tight. He nodded firmly, his hand moving to cover hers. "You don't have to ask, Rania. I promise you. I'll take care of them both. Your son will have a home, and Leo, well, he's family now." Rania's lips curved into a smile, though her strength was clearly fading. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've been everything I couldn't be these last few months. You're a good man, Umar." Leo let out a soft whimper, his eyes fixed on her face as if he understood every word. Umar reached down, giving the dog a reassuring pat. "We'll make sure they're okay, won't we, Leo?" The dog's tail gave a faint wag, but his expression remained solemn. There was a quiet understanding in his gaze, a depth of loyalty that went beyond words. The hours passed slowly. Rania drifted in and out of sleep, her energy waning. Each time she opened her eyes, she looked for her son, for Leo, and for Umar. And each time, they were there, grounding her in a reality that felt both fragile and enduring. That evening the room grew quieter. The sunlight faded, leaving only the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Rania's breaths became more labored, each one a struggle. Umar sat close, holding her hand, his other resting on Leo's head. The dog hadn't moved from his place by the bed, his steady presence a comfort to them both. "Umar," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He leaned closer, his heart aching at the sight of her pale face. "Yes, Rania?" he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. She met his eyes, her gaze filled with a mix of sorrow and peace. "Take care of them, and tell my son how much I love him." "I will," he promised, his voice breaking. "I swear it." Rania's eyes fluttered closed, her hand tightening briefly in his. Her final breath was soft, slipping away in the stillness of the room. Leo let out a low, mournful howl, his head resting on the bed beside her, as if refusing to leave her side. Umar stayed there, holding her hand long after she had gone. The image of her peaceful face, her son's laughter echoing faintly in his mind, and Leo's quiet loyalty etched themselves deeply into his heart. He knew that the promise he had made to her wasn't just a commitment, it was now his purpose. As the night deepened, Umar stood, his movements slow and deliberate. He knelt beside Leo, wrapping an arm around the dog's sturdy frame. "We'll take care of them," he murmured, his voice filled with resolve. "You and me, together." Leo nuzzled his head into Umar's side, his quiet whine the only sound in the room. Together, they mourned the loss of Rania, their hearts heavy with grief but bound by the love she had entrusted to them. The rain had long ceased, leaving behind a crisp stillness that lingered in the air, as if the world itself mourned the passing of Rania. In the modest home of Officer Umar and his wife Fatima, life began to shift in ways neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't a grand house, but it was warm, filled with the quiet comforts of well-worn furniture, soft rugs, and the scent of Fatima's cinnamon tea that always seemed to linger. Now, the spaces between them were filled with new sounds. The soft babble of the infant Rania had left behind, and the steady padding of Leo, the loyal German shepherd who never strayed far from the child. Umar watched from the kitchen doorway, his arms folded across his chest, as Fatima carefully fed the baby. The boy's tiny hand reached up, clutching at the air until Leo's nose nudged it gently. The child let out a delighted squeal, and Leo responded with a soft wag of his tail, his amber eyes calm, yet watchful. "You see how he protects him," Umar said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of admiration. "It's as though he knows this boy is his purpose now." Fatima glanced up, her gentle smile lighting up her face. Animals sense these things. He's lost too, Umar, but he's found something to hold on to, just like we all have. Her voice was soft, soothing, as though the baby could understand every word. Umar stepped closer, his gaze lingering on Leo. The dog's fur was still patchy in places where scars ran deep, remnants of a loyalty that had cost him dearly. "Rania trusted us," Umar murmured, "to take care of them both, and I won't let her down." Fatima reached out, resting her hand on Umar's arm. "You won't. We won't." Her words were steady, as if she were grounding them both in the promise they'd made. Word of Rania's tragic story had spread through the neighborhood, carried in hushed tones from one door to the next. Many of the neighbors had been there that stormy night when Leo's relentless barking had drawn them out. They had seen the child, frail and motionless, saved only by the dog's fierce devotion. Now, those same neighbors began showing up on Umar's doorstep, bearing casseroles, toys, and hand-me-down clothes. Mrs. Hafsa, a widow from down the street, arrived one afternoon with a stack of hand-knitted blankets. "For the boy," she said simply, her weathered hands brushing over the soft fabric. "And for the dog, too. He's earned his place." Umar thanked her with a quiet sincerity, and as she left, he found himself marveling at how tragedy could weave people together, binding them with threads of kindness. Leo adapted to his new life with an almost uncanny grace. Though his first owner was gone, his heart seemed fully devoted to the child. He followed the boy everywhere, curling up beside his crib at night, sitting guard at the foot of his stroller during walks, and even nudging him awake when his cries broke the silence of the early morning. One evening, as Umar sat in his armchair, the baby nestled against his chest, he noticed Leo watching them intently. The dog's gaze was steady, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "You loved her too, didn't you?" Umar asked softly, his words more for himself than for Leo. "You'll keep loving him for her." Leo let out a soft whine, resting his head on Umar's foot. It was the kind of answer only a creature like Leo could give, and it filled Umar with a profound sense of gratitude. As the months passed, the baby began to grow stronger, his cheeks rounding and his laughter filling the house with a joy that neither Umar nor Fatima had known they needed. And yet Umar knew that one day the boy would ask questions about the mother he would never remember. So, on quiet nights, When the baby drifted off to sleep and the house was still, Umar would sit by the crib, speaking softly into the darkness. "Your mother was brave," he would begin, his voice steady. "She loved you more than anything in this world. When the storm came, she made sure you were safe, even though it cost her everything." The words came slowly, carefully, as though Umar were building a bridge between the boy's future and the mother who had sacrificed so much. Fatima often listened from the doorway, her hands clasped as she prayed silently for the boy's strength and understanding. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the quiet neighborhood in warm hues of amber and gold. Inside the small but cozy house, Umar adjusted the soft woolen blanket around Mustafa's tiny shoulders. The boy, now 4 years old, was playing with a set of wooden blocks that Umar had carved for him during long, peaceful evenings by the fireplace. Mustafa's laughter filled the room, a sweet melody of joy that echoed through the walls, reminding Umar of how much life had changed in the past years. Leo, the loyal dog with his thick golden fur, lay sprawled on the rug nearby, his watchful eyes never straying too far from Mustafa. Every time the boy reached out to stack another block or leaned too far forward, Leo's ears perked up, ready to steady him with a nudge of his nose or a gentle paw. The bond between them was unshakable, built on countless days of shared adventures and quiet moments of trust. Umar sat back in his chair, the creak of the wood beneath him blending with the soft hum of the house. He watched Mustafa with a tenderness that ran deep. This boy was no longer just the child he had found during a stormy night. Mustafa had become his son, a beacon of hope and purpose in his life. Umar's wife, Fatima, often said the boy had brought light into their home, and Umar couldn't agree more. "Mustafa," Fatima called softly as she stepped into the room, carrying a tray with 3 steaming cups of mint tea. She set it on the small wooden table and crouched beside the boy, her warm hands smoothing his unruly curls. "Do you remember what we talked about yesterday?" Mustafa tilted his head, his wide, curious eyes meeting hers. "About Mama?" he asked, his voice innocent yet filled with the kind of wisdom only a child could carry. Fatima nodded, her smile gentle. "Yes, about your mother. You should always remember that she loved you very much. She gave you the greatest gift, your life. And she left you with someone very special to watch over you." The boy's gaze shifted to Leo, who wagged his tail in response, as if he understood every word. Mustafa leaned forward to hug the dog, burying his face in the soft fur. "Leo is the best," he whispered, his voice muffled. "He keeps me safe." Umar exchanged a glance with Fatima, his heart swelling with gratitude. In moments like these, he felt the weight of his responsibilities as a father, but also the joy of seeing love and trust blossom in their home. "Leo isn't just your protector," Umar said, his voice steady and full of warmth. "He's part of this family. Just like you, Mustafa. We're all here because of love and because we've chosen to stand by each other." The boy nodded solemnly, his small fingers stroking Leo's fur. He was still too young to understand the full story of how he came to be in their lives, but Umar knew that as Mustafa grew, he would learn. And when the time came, they would share the story in a way that honored his past while celebrating the life they had built together. The evening wore on, the house alive with the simple rhythms of family life. Mustafa's blocks toppled with a cheerful crash, followed by his giggles. Fatima hummed softly as she folded laundry by the fireplace. Umar sipped his tea, the warmth spreading through him, grounding him in the moment. Later, after Mustafa had been tucked into bed, Umar and Fatima sat together in the living room. The silence between them was comfortable, punctuated only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft snores of Leo, who had settled by Mustafa's bedside. "Do you ever think about how much he's brought to our lives?" Umar asked quietly, his hand resting over Fatima's. "I never imagined feeling this kind of peace after everything." Fatima smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "He's a miracle, Umar. And Leo, I think even he knows it. They're both here for a reason." Umar nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I want Mustafa to grow up knowing where he came from. But more importantly, I want him to know he's loved. That no matter what, this is his family." Fatima squeezed his hand. "He already knows. You've shown him every day, and Leo..." She chuckled softly. "Leo is the very definition of loyalty. If Mustafa learns nothing else, he'll learn that love can heal anything." Outside, the night settled in, blanketing the house in a calm stillness. As Umar and Fatima sat together, their thoughts turned to the future, not one filled with uncertainty or fear, but with hope. Their little family had faced storms, both literal and emotional, but they had emerged stronger, bound by love. In the bedroom, Mustafa stirred in his sleep, his small hand resting on Leo's back. The dog opened one eye, his tail thumping softly against the bed frame before settling back into the warmth of the moment. Mustafa's dreams were filled with laughter, the kind that only a child surrounded by love could know. And as the night wore on, the house stood as a testament to their journey, a place of healing, resilience, and the quiet power of love that had transformed 3 individuals into a family. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-warming story. It's incredible how love, loyalty, and resilience can transform lives, just like it did for Umar and Leo. This story reminds us that family isn't just about where we come from, it's about the bonds we create and the love we choose to give. Now, it's your turn. Do you have a story about unconditional love, or how someone or even a loyal companion changed your life? We'd love to hear it. Share your experiences in the comments below, and let's celebrate the beauty of connection and kindness together. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, take care, and remember, love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds.